Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Black Cloak, Captain Marvel, It's Jeff, and the upcoming The Cull at Image Comics. It's Kelly Thompson. Thanks for coming on, Kelly.
Thanks for having me, David. Glad to be here.
When you were saying It's Jeff, do you have to have an exclamation point when you say it out loud?
I think I don't say it out loud that often, but I do yell in my head, "It's Jeff."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a sitcom when they walk onto the set.
Yes, exactly. Like a 80s, 70s, 90s, I don't know, sitcom or a Saturday morning. That's definitely like sort of what we were going for when I think I came up with the title. I think Steve Walker and I were just like, what should we call it? And I was like, I mean, it's just Jeff. It's Jeff. Is that crazy? He's like, no, I think it's good. I was like, okay, let's do it, man.
This just reminds me of like Happy Days. Like if he was a character that walked into like a bar or wherever the Shake Shack or I have never watched Happy Days, walks in there and somebody's like, it's Jeff. I think this makes him the Fonz. I don't know if he's really the Fonz, but it works.
I mean, I think he's the Fonz in the sense that the rules bend around Jeff the same way the Happy Days, which I haven't seen that much, but that seems to bend around Fonzie because everybody loves him. He's a favorite character, but does he really fit? Like this adult man in a leather jacket with all these like kids? Like it's weird.
Yeah.
So, but the world bends around something that it likes and it tries to make it fit. And I feel like Jeff's a little bit like that.
I think that absolutely is true. It's funny. I had this whole bit that I was going to get into before Jeff, but I mean, we're already knee deep in Jeffville. We're comparing him to the Fonz.
Honestly, it happens a lot.
I did want to, before we get into like Black Cloak and the Cull and some of your other projects, I wanted to bring up something that really stood out to me from your profile on Twitter. I love the fact that on your profile, you list off your current or notable projects saying Black Cloak, The Cull, Black Widow, Captain Marvel, It's Jeff, and Hawkeye. But then you specifically note after those that you're the co-creator of Jeff the Landshark. You have created multiple characters, a number of characters. But Jeff the Landshark is so notable that the character's co-creation earns a special mention in your profile, and you're absolutely right to do so. It's very strange, but it's amazing. I
changed it specifically because I noticed this is a thing,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely the character that that has hit the most. I mean, I think Star certainly did pretty well, got her own miniseries, really got a lot of attention. L'Oreal, Carol's half-sister, a little bit, Binary a little bit. The Living Blade I created for Black Widow, I think he got some good attention on him. I think I could have built that up even more if we'd sort of gone back to that story or done more there. But Jeff just had a life of his own because all of those things that I just rattled off, the Living Blade, Star, L'Oreal, Binary, they all had arcs basically planned around them. Things that were designed to highlight them and feature them and show them off. And then they sort of sink or fail based on that merit, right? But Jeff was like an offshoot joke that I was inspired to do when Stefano Caselli and I were doing issue 1 of West Coast Avengers. There was this land shark, Modoc or Brodock rather, created all these land sharks to terrorize Venice Beach. And in the background of one of the panels was this land shark, but it just looked really concerned about being there.
It does look very concerned. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, I was like, what is this? Is there a thing here? And so that was sort of the impetus for it. And then, I've got these 2 amazing cats that sort of inspired some behavior. And I really love, and I think at the time that I created Jeff, I wasn't cognizant of how much this is true for me, but I've since realized I really love like a sort of non-human creature in a story, like a familiar, like in, in Andor, literally, I was so attached to all those characters in Andor, but if they killed that robot,
oh yeah,
I swear to God, there was gonna be blood in the streets. I couldn't handle it. The nascent emotional beginnings of robot life. Like I couldn't handle it, man. And like, so the Golden Compass, they've got sort of familiars, that demons that are sort of attached to them or whatever. So I sort of love this thing. I was doing it even before I realized how much I loved it. I did it in my book Story Killer. Ironically, not ironically, that character is also called Jeff. It's like a shape-changing demon thing. So yeah, I just had this idea about this land shark and would this be fun? But the point being, he's barely in 4 issues. Like he appears on panel and then we kind of do some fun stuff with him. But, you know, he's certainly not a major villain or a character that's related to anybody or a thrust of anything. I had an opportunity to then port him over into Deadpool after West Coast Avengers got canceled. And so he's in that a little bit too. But I'm just saying people just take to him. Like there wasn't anything set up to like make sure that it works. But it's this more organic way that people seem to latch on to things that's really fun. I mean, part of the reason he's popular today is because Gurihiru, who draws It's Jeff, they loved the character and they just started drawing him into things. Like they drew him into a really incredible banner they did for a Tokyo con of some kind. That was one of the first places I saw people going, what is this little shark dog here? What is this? Like, it was like a big stage. But then they were also drawing him into as like little Easter eggs. So it was like Hulk has a Jeff magnet on his fridge, and you know, Peter Parker has Jeff boxers and whatever. And I just think it like gets into people's heads, and it became this thing where it's like, well, let's see more of that. And then I do think I know what I'm doing when it comes to Jeff, and hopefully when it comes to comics. And then Gurihiru are absolute rock stars. And so that Marvel Unlimited strip for him, it was just perfect. And, you know, during the pandemic too, people really needed some light, fun, hopeful stuff that's very blue sky, which is very how Jeff is, because again, the Marvel universe sort of bends around him. I mean, we have a strip where he ate the Infinity Gauntlet, you know, so it's like whatever goes. You can sort of, you know, sometimes Jeff has pockets and those pockets don't have any change in them, but they have money in them. Like he doesn't really have pockets. It's a cartoon, you know? It's
yeah.
Like you just gotta let it be its thing. I was just actually just arguing with my partner about that because I was watching some cartoons and he was like, well, you know, you need more of these things. And I was like, Jeff operates on cartoon logic. And he's like, yeah, but, and I was like, no buts. I had him eat the Infinity Gauntlet with the stones in it. Like, you know, and we didn't even do it on panel. We just showed he had a tummy ache. And then we showed like that was what was inside it. Like, you know, so it's very fun to play with the big pieces of the Marvel universe in like a non-canon, super fun, cartoony way. And I think it's paid off. People love it. They're so into it. I had so many retailers when that came out in print being like, tell Marvel to stop doing everything they're doing and do more of this. And I was like, listen, you're preaching to the choir, man. I'm happy to do more of that. So
I do think it's interesting how, you know, I just had Ram V on the podcast, the writer, and we were talking about the idea of like reverse engineering ideas.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing about like these big new characters and stuff like that. Like you could do, just like with a comic, theoretically you could try to reverse engineer something, but it's like you didn't go in thinking that Jeff was going to become this like big deal character. You just were like, oh, that, you know, land shark that Stefano drew is really concerned, and I can kind of like, I can build on that idea. I do want to say though, I just interviewed Stefano for to talk about his art.
Oh,
his character acting is so good. The fact that there was a concerned land shark, there was no way that was a mistake.
I agreed. Totally agreed. Stefano is one of the artists I've worked with that I got to see his work the least during the process, like where he would just turn in finished stuff. And that's not usually how I operate. I don't want to say it's because I'm a control freak, but maybe it is. We don't know. I like to think it's because, you know, there are sometimes going to be problems, but I want to find the problem when it's in layouts. I don't want to find the problem later, right? Mm-hmm. And so I always look at layouts, and I tend to be pretty collaborative with my artists, like us going back and forth or whatever. But it always depends a little bit, right, on how that artist wants to work and how you are and all of that. Every time it's a little bit of a new marriage that you have to figure out. And in the case of Stefano, it wasn't really a choice. It was just he turns in finished pages and that's it. And like, I knew how lucky we were to have him, so I wasn't going to have a problem with that, but I was super nervous about it. This is one of the only times I'd done it. I don't think I needed a single change. He's so good.
Yeah.
He's so good. Like, you know, I honestly, I can't really remember anything significant that I was like, oh, he got this wrong, we got to go back or whatever. He's just so good. He just gets it. His character work, his expressions, he knows. I think the only thing we had was in that first arc, there were a couple times where, because we were dealing with giant, like 50-foot, more like 250-foot woman tall things, there were a few times where maybe they weren't placed with like the right context so you could understand their size. But that's like an incredibly minor complaint in an incredibly difficult like run. Like that's something that's really hard to pull off, you know? But yeah, all those characters, all those complicated, we were doing that confessionals, you know, he just nailed it, man. He's so good.
I do think it's interesting to look at like Jeff's evolution. Like you wrote about this on your Substack, like visually speaking and seeing how everyone kind of drew him a little bit differently. And then I'm trying to remember, there was the one who did the Round Boy first. I don't remember the name of the artist.
Kevin LeBronda did it for Deadpool.
That's it. Yeah.
7, 6?
Yeah. Like that was the one that kind of like, oh, this is a cute thing for sure now. And then when Gurihiru, I mean, we're talking about Stefano as like an incredible talent. I mean, like I was looking at this like Spider-Man and Venom Double Trouble book at my shop today. And I was just like, I feel like I can make a compelling case that Gurihiru is the best artist in comics. And I don't think most people would agree with me, but I think some would. And I don't really care if they did because I just think Gurihiru is incredible.
They're incredible. They're great storytellers. I think it's not escaping anyone that they could do It's Jeff without me, I'm sure. They're very talented. They're very smart. They're very clever. And they just get it. They just know what I'm doing. It's so easy and seamless working with them. They have incredible instincts. You know, they turn in their layouts and I just cackle. Like they're just so good. And you almost never have any notes for them. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, I thought maybe we should make this one a long panel. And they're like, oh, yeah, we see that. And then they do it. It's really incredible working with them that they just have that in their blood so much. They're also really just, they flip really elegantly, effortlessly, it seems, from, you know, the Marvel Unlimited scrolling style is pretty different, how you read it and how it feels. But then they just go right back to comics, Double Trouble, no problem. You know, just turn it on, turn it off. They're so good. And they're a delight to work with. They're just great.
They really are. I did an interview with them once, and in the process, I discovered that like one of the first comics that they were into was Spawn, which is like one of the most wild things. I never would have expected that, but you know, that's what you get for judging people based off of the art that they do. The last thing I want to bring up about Jeff, though, I think it's funny. There's something. It's hard to put your finger on why people like Jeff so much, but I feel like your Marvel Comics number 1000 story you did with Pepe Larraz that was like the Elsa Bloodstone one. Ostensibly an Elsa Bloodstone story. I love Elsa Bloodstone. But at the same time, I feel like it perfectly encapsulates why people love him in the sense that she's having this like stern, like a monster hunter is having a stern conversation with this like, you know, land shark. And then he sits there and I think he goes like, meow, or like some sort of weird sound. And she says, I will kill anything that tries to harm you. And I think that's like, there's like an inverse John Wick type thing that we all have going on where we feel the need to protect Jeff. And the only way to ensure that is to always see him in comics.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff was sort of around, I don't know what the exact timeline is, but we created Jeff before I was aware of Grogu. But there is definitely that same energy of, it just feels like people rallying around a thing that just feels pure and good and that you want to survive and you want to protect. And I think it goes, you know, like you said, it's the John Wick energy, the lone wolf and cub energy of Mandalorian, right? Like there's just something in us that wants to protect a thing. And I think when you can make it not actually a baby, like, you know, when you're trying to play with it and subvert it a little bit. Like, I also think there's a thing where sometimes the best way to find your humanity is connecting with something that is not human, an animal, something in nature, something that's not something that you relate to the way you relate to people who are so complicated and messed up and sometimes very dark and bad and twisted in a way that sort of the natural world sort of isn't, right? The natural world is more innocent, doesn't, yes, the stray cats in my neighborhood want to kill birds, but they're not killing them for any horrible reason. They're killing them because this is circle of life, right?
Right.
And I just feel like there's something about other humans that can make it hard to find our sympathy and compassion for them the same way we can for something that doesn't look like us. Maybe it comes from that thing where we all hate ourselves so much. Like, they talk about the things we say to ourselves we would never say to our best friend or someone we loved because we're so cruel to ourselves. And so I wonder if that's like a thing. Like, we have trouble finding compassion and humanity for each other a lot of times because we know how messed up we are. We know how flawed people are, but like a creature has an innocence and we can project wanting to protect that onto it. So I don't know. It's something I'm working through because I really am fascinated with these kind of stories, and especially with Jeff taking off the way he did. And I really agree with you guys about trying to reverse engineer. I mean, I think a lot of us spend our time thinking about that kind of thing because it's hard out here to create and be even just being sometimes being mildly successful is even harder, is the hardest one of all, because you sort of, you've got it and you're sort of getting it, but you can't quite break through. And so of course we see a thing that works and we want to figure out how we can do that or do something like that. And how do you capture that magic? But for me, it's been accidental. I go into everything every time trying to create something great that people will love. And sometimes it hits like Jeff and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. It
is interesting too, because you said you do kind of have, like, you've had kind of animal-like characters in your stories. Like in Black Cloak, there's there's Mr. Starlight, the Taka, and the Taka are threaded in throughout the story. It is pretty much the cutest creature since Jeff, especially the way that Meredith draws the or Mr. Starlight.
Yeah.
And it is interesting though, because, I'm not saying that you were trying to like reverse engineer something there, like trying to work the Jeff magic into Black Cloak, but it's working. I love the Taka.
Well, I hope so. It's great that you love the Taka because the Taka are a really big part of how Volume 1 wraps up. And they're a really big deal. And we also were trying to just make people care about them and be interested in them. But yeah, they're 100%. I was trying to reverse engineer something similar to Jeff that could have those sort of similar beats and that Meredith and I could own, Can you guys love Mr. Starlight or his offspring, please? Because, we can bring you infinite number of books for that, and that's something we can control. But with Jeff, I mean, as much as I've been able to protect him so far, and I don't think Marvel has any ill intentions with him, at the end of the day, I created him for Marvel Comics, and that's that, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bittersweet, I would never go back and not create Jeff. I love him so much, and I've had so much fun. And, I think he's potentially a cash cow for Marvel for a few years. So they'd be foolish to do anything bad with him. But yeah, it's hard to, leave your little baby with the corporation that you birthed him for. Here you go.
Now I'm just envisioning a cash shark.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Bad Idea is back, and they're bringing their biggest book yet, Megalith. Megalith is an epic of unparalleled detail and artistry. It's the result of a mammoth 5-year production journey where no expense was spared, and a monument such as this demands an equally worthy presentation, and Bad Idea needs your help to make that a reality. In 2018, Matt Kint and Louis LaRosa set to create a comic book without the constraints of time and with an unrivaled budget. Joined by electric colorist Laura Martin and veteran letterer Taylor Esposito, what resulted from their efforts is an event comic unlike any before it. The comic book only known by its code name, Megalith. A comic book of such breathtaking beauty that it needs to be seen to be believed. This magnum opus of bad ideas hitting Kickstarter soon, with this crowdfunding effort focused on promoting the release into comic shops. So if you're a comic shop and you want Megalith in your stores, keep an eye on Kickstarter for just that. And now, back to the show.
Let's get to Black Cloak. It's your current Image series with artist Meredith McClaren. And when I say artist, I mean penciler, inker, and colorist.
Yes.
Letterer Becca Carey, editor Charles Beecham, and designer Ryan Hughes. Here's a solicit for the first issue for anyone who hasn't read it. Blade Runner style mixes with saga-esque drama in a delectable fantasy sci-fi blend as two Black Cloaks try to solve the murder of a beloved prince in Kyros, the last city in the known world before his murder tips the city into war. You know, we've already talked about how there's the adorable Taka in there, but I wanted to start with the beginning. What was the origin of Black Cloak? Did it start with wanting to work with Meredith again, or did it start with the idea of the book?
It started with the idea of the book, although I'm very grateful Meredith is involved. I actually talked with another friend about doing it years ago, back when it had a different name and was quite a different book back then. I mean, I think the biggest change is Meredith, because I think her work is so sort of singular and not really like anyone else's, that her drawing it immediately puts this sort of different stamp on it. But it was a very different idea when I talked about doing it with another friend of mine. And so Meredith came second to this idea, but the second I pitched it to her, I was like, man, I hope she really likes it, because I think she could really excel at this, you know. And I did pick, you know, because I always, like any writer, I've always got, you know, a handful of sort of ideas sitting on the back burner. And I pulled a few off to pitch to her, but this was the one that was the furthest along. And because we were doing it through this Substack thing digitally at first, it was good to have something that had a little bit more work done, especially since there's so much world building stuff that had to be done. But, you know, she loves doing creatures. She's very interested in monsters and what makes a monster and what all those things are. She likes fantasy. She really likes fantasy stuff and some sci-fi, but she's more fantasy. But her style is, I would say, very clean and sharp and more sort of almost like cell animation, not what you would necessarily expect to see with more classic sort of fussier fantasy illustration, which immediately gives it a more sci-fi vibe to me, which is exactly what I wanted, because I didn't want it to look sort of older and like, you know, period Western fantasy or something. I wanted something that looked like fantasy creatures in the future, you know? So it really helped to get us there. And it's funny because when we were first talking about the concept and the tone and the like neo-noir Blade Runner aspects to it, she raised some concern that someone else she knew was doing a book, and the sci-fi aspect, she was worried were going to be maybe too similar or something. And so I was like, okay, good call. Let me go check that out. And I looked at it and I was like, no, we're fine. Like, not only does your work look completely different than this person's, but it's going in different directions. It's focused on different things. We're fine. And so she was like, okay. And so we got into it. And it's really laughable to me now that she even thought that would even, like, if you put those two books, like, I'm not going to name the book, but nobody could guess it, is what I'm like. The books look so different. And I don't even think it's that they are that different. It's that her style is so powerful in setting a tone of what it is, that it just really, you know, it really sets the tone for everything, you know, and it feels like a totally different book than what those people are doing over there. And so it's been a treat. She's an incredible collaborator. I'm very lucky.
I do think the open to issue number 4, or where Essex and Pax are going under the water to go see the mermaids with Sash. That whole sequence is really underlining just like how impactful Meredith really is, because there's like this, they're kind of tripping, and there's this watercolor element she does to it that just like shows how the world is kind of disintegrating for Pax and Essex. But then there's also like some extreme cartooning bits, like when she has Sash say, "No, eat Calliope." Those beats, there's not a lot of artists that have all those different tricks in their bag. But Meredith does.
She really does. She really does. And you know, I can't remember what I wrote in the script for that when they're sort of tripping and everything's crazy. I mean, I did write that those things were happening, but like, you know, she's she doesn't then write you back an email and be like, oh, I was thinking this, this, and this. She is a true artist because she just speaks with her pages.
Mm-hmm.
She just does it the way she sees it. And then it comes back and you're like, oh, you're like, that's awesome. I can't believe that's what she did with that. It's so great. Occasionally I have to push her because I can tell she's not going all the way. And whether that's because, you know, it's easier and faster and we're always on a deadline, or because all of us sometimes we're like, yeah, that's good enough. And sometimes she'll send it to me and I'm like, I think you got to take another swing at this one. Like, it just doesn't feel special that way or something, you know. And I told her, I recently had her do this on a page because I was like, I get it. I see what you're doing, but I just think we have to push it further. And what she sent back was such a level up that I said to her, and I was laughing, but I was like, you got to be careful sending me something that's that big a level up, when I was like, oh, I think you got to push a little bit, because like makes me feel like she's got that in her pocket every time, you know? And I know that's not the case, but it did give me pause. Like, you know, you suddenly, as a selfish writer in the equation, you go, well, should I be telling her she's not pushing it far enough on every one of these pages? Like, you know, but that's not what it is. It's all about balance. But I love that when I ask her, like, she's just got so many good ideas, and the coloring especially is like, I mean, I almost feel like, because when you talk to her about it, she doesn't really know what to say about it. It's almost like she's possessed when she's coloring. I swear to God, it's almost like someone takes over and then it comes out and she's like, oh yeah, okay, it looks pretty good. And I'm like, are you kidding? It's incredible. Look at these tones, look at these blues, look at this. And she's like, yeah, I don't really remember doing that. And I'm like, okay, you're crazy. So she's really gifted. And I hope more people will, Black Cloak is not, you know, a big superhero book that appeals to everyone. It's an indie fantasy sci-fi procedural book, right? So, but I do hope that it helps her raise her profile even more, because I just think she's so underrated by this industry. They just don't really understand how great she is, but she's incredible.
I do think it's interesting. I mean, you two have been working together for a long time. I mean, literally as long as you've been working in comics, because she did Heart in the Box with you at Dark Horse, your first book. The interesting thing about this is I think a lot of times sometimes these partnerships don't necessarily work, whether that's for personal reasons or for creative reasons or whatever. Just sometimes, you know, when you're on a project with somebody, you just don't mesh well. But it's clear you and Meredith do. What is it about? I mean, clearly you two can say anything to each other, but what is it about that partnership that just works? Like, how do you bring out the best in each other's work?
Well, I don't know if I'm bringing out anything in Meredith. I want to believe that, but I don't really know if that's true. But I will say, speaking for me, she's just incredibly professional. I know that sounds stupid, but you'd be shocked how rare that is, to find someone who can just sit down and do the work and meet the deadlines. And, you know, there's no drama with her. There's no anything. She's just about the work. And I'm like that too. So it's a good match in that way. Like, we just want to make cool comics, man. And so finding someone who also wants to do that and who shares story sensibilities. My worry with Meredith is always that, you know, she's a very talented writer too. So, you know, I'm just always like watching my back for, she doesn't need me anymore, and she never did. And when will she figure that out? But I hope that she gets something a little different out of doing a project with me than she does of doing it with herself. You know, I'm sure sometimes it's inferior, but I think sometimes the collaboration is also fun. It's nice to have someone else worrying about the big plotting beats so you can worry about how it looks, you know? I assume that's why she keeps working, because she doesn't need me. She's a very talented writer. You
know, the funny thing is the visuals of the book are extremely important to me as a reader, if only because it was actually, I was interested in the book, but the thing that convinced me to 100% buy it in single issues rather than trades, I never buy variants, but I bought the Jeff Decal cover for number 1. And
good.
The interesting thing is, it wasn't just his art. It was how it interacted with the cover design. I love the cover design with like the tiling in the top third and then the art in the box that in the bottom 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, like it is, in my opinion, a perfect cover structure on several levels. I mean, there's a lot of like nerd, like retailer stuff I could get into here, but it works on several levels. I'm curious, like, was that a you thing? Was that a Ryan Hughes thing? Where did that?
Ryan.
That was Ryan.
Ryan. I mean, I want to give myself credit for hiring talented / the right people, and for recognizing good design when I see it and helping pick the right, whatever. But yeah, that's all Ryan. I mean, he designed the title block, which I think is perfect, and he designed that the structure with having the reoccurring block. That has the image in it, which he honestly had to convince me on a little bit. Like, I loved the way it looked, but I was just concerned, here I am looking at like typical financial, non-creative person, which I never thought I would put myself in that mold. But, here I am paying the bills now because we're doing the comic on my dime. And so I'm paying for all this incredible cover art from all these great artists. And I'm like, wait, you want to just put it in a little box? I was like, come on, Ryan, like, you're killing me. But I knew it was good. And it's where we ended up because it was the right choice. But he's a great designer.
Well, it's also really versatile. Like, I like what Meredith did in the fourth cover, where it's like Pax looking at a screen, and that's what the box is.
Yeah.
Like, that stuff is really smart. And it's interesting. Like, I mentioned the deep nerd retailer stuff. Retailers will tell you that, like, they want the title at the top of the page.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that,
I'm in trouble on the Cull, by the way. But we tried everything we could. We couldn't make it work. So here we are.
It also reminds me in a weird way of Paper Girls covers, where like the original Paper Girls covers had these really bright colors to them, and it made it really pop. And like each Black Cloak issue has like a different color as like the surrounding element around the box. And like that stuff.
They also had different backs. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if you're ever in the presence of a bunch of them in a shop or something, or I have them all here, they're just like a rainbow because they all have these crazy different colored backs. It's really fun.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's just really smart. But, did it just come down to like he pitched you on it and it just seemed like the right answer? Because it's weird that this is like such an impactful thing for me, but it's funny. Like, it really did. There's a version of this world where I trade weighted it because I didn't find the first cover as striking. That cover was so striking. I was like, I got to get this.
Well, that's cool. That's interesting. I've never really thought about it like that before, but you're right. If you're a reader who doesn't buy in on the first floppy, you maybe just go, I'll just trade with it, unless there's something there that's like must have about it. So, well, I'm glad we were able to get you. I think it was the case of Ryan / the best design winning out. I was resistant to it briefly because I've been like, well, are we wasting some of our cover area? And he made a lot of the arguments you're making. It'll stand out. It's well branded. It'll look different than the other things. We can use these colors to our advantage, to help them pop. So yeah, I mean, and it was the right call, and he's been able to do really great things with it too. I would say a few times variant cover artists it hasn't worked quite as well as I'd have liked, but especially with Meredith's stuff, like the one you're talking about with the screen, like he was really able to make that work. And like the one that has the mermaid tail in the morgue, issue 3, I love that one. And when we first tried that, it wasn't really working because it's in a box and then here's the box, right? And so it just wasn't. But once we had the tail flopping out of the box and like made it all work, it was gangbusters, man. It was very cool. Yeah,
like the one with 5 where the cloaks are interacting with the color. Yeah,
that's my favorite one.
I could just keep going about this stuff. It's really great. The covers are really fantastic.
When Meredith turned in that illustration with the Black Cloaks, this is a great example of hire the right people, because when she turned that in, I was like, oh my God, I love this one so much. This is my favorite cover. And then I was like, I think we're just going to have to go clean dress on it because I don't know what Ryan's going to do with that. Well, so I sent them to Ryan, and I maybe said something like that, like, oh, maybe you have to do this one clean dress. I don't know. And when he sent it back with the colors, with the background being the colors that are coming out from underneath the cloaks, it was so inspired. I freaked out. It was so good, man.
I love it. Well, I mean, connecting to all this stuff, though, this all connects to one of the things that I love the most about Black Cloak, which is the world building. You kind of mentioned that before, but Kyros feels like the city, the place where everything is happening. It feels very lived in from the earliest scenes, and it's like own version of it lived in because, you read a lot of these kind of futuristic sci-fi fantasy type stories. You mentioned Blade Runner. And a lot of times, like the first place you really get a feel for like the world is there's always a noodle house you go to. Instead, in the first issue, it's a coffee and curiosity shop with a Taka doll, and I like that. And then there's also like the very first shot we get is this. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a almost like cutaway dollhouse view of Kyros, like this view from the side that gives you a feel for the layout and the structure of the city.
Yeah.
All that stuff, it really works, especially with the narration in that first page. It seems like world building had to be a real focus for you and Meredith in the beginning, because this isn't just like, this is a crime story that's happening. This is a crime story happening in a world with a real heightened political climate and a lot of really weird stuff that's happening and a lot of different types of people and hierarchies and everything like that. Was that a big focus?
Yeah. Yes. I think, I think a lot of that's on Meredith. I mean, obviously I give her the blueprint, but she's building it out, and we're talking about it as she builds it, but almost never am I going, oh no, this is wrong, it needs to be this. I mean, she's intuitive, she takes the map, she knows what to do with it. We're very on the same page. We're interested in a lot of the same things, but then she has the bonus of, I feel like her art, I mean, not that I don't read these things or have these influences, but I'm a white person who lives in America. She is too, but she's got a lot more art interests that help her, because like when I write something, I'll be like, listen, let's not just lean into sort of like Western fantasy here. I'd love to pull things in from, and then I give her some examples. But like, for example, they do go to a ramen house later, right? And that creature, I think I was like, I don't really care what this guy Jono is. Like, he could be a fairy, or he should be something that flies though. And so she came back she was like, hear me out. Here's the design for Jono. And she said this amazing sketch that's basically exactly like he looks like now in the book. But he looks like sort of like a dog or something, like a werewolf or whatever, that stands on his hind legs. And she's like, I have it on authority from the things I've read that he's a flying, it's like a Japanese spirit or something. I can't even remember what it was, but like she'd researched it and she was like, this was her argument for it. And I was like, listen, you don't have to do the hard sell. It's great. It's a great design. Let's do it. And I do think that helped build it out. Like, it's a great argument for collaboration, right? Because even if you're two white women who live in America, you're still pulling from more references once there's two of you. You're still pulling from more influences and more things you love and more things you want to see, and hopefully getting a more diverse, rich environment because of that. So I definitely lean on her for a lot of that stuff. But we also said from the beginning that the approach, a lot of fantasy, although I'm talking more about prose here, is not a good fit for me. I don't read as much of it as one might think, because the description and all of that is a lot for me. I prefer a more spare style. It's why we didn't go in for captions except for that first page. I don't want us in our head explaining every little language quibble or whatever. I just want to plunge our reader into it like they've crash landed on this world and now it's sink or swim. And because of that, we make enough of it feel like modern America in the sense of the language and the dialogue and whatever. And we just try to pull in little things that show you, it's different. Like, oh, this creature has wings, and hey, you can't go in the lagoon because mermaids eat you here. And this is the word they use for rush. And like, it's a little enough that you can intuit it as you're going and not feel like you're lost. Which is not a style that works for everyone. Some people want way more than that. And some people are like, I don't need way more than that, but you can't give me this little because I'm not following it. But so far I've found most people who are reading seem to really respond to the sort of middle ground that we're taking, where we're plunging you in there, but we're not explaining everything. But I think what's not explained is still, you can intuit it, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal.
I mean, I think the interesting thing about world building, I think, is that a lot of times people think of this big grand thing where you're doing these big grand swings, but sometimes it's just having a line like the Kyros 3. Like that's a thing that exists, which immediately makes you wonder, what is the Kyros 3? And then you find out what the Kyros 3 is. You almost like speak into existence the world, and it just expands based off of these little things that happen. And like I think you guys do that really well.
Well, good. Thank you. I mean, I recognize that it doesn't work for everyone. I saw someone talking about, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what the rules are. And like, I get it. It's not for everyone. Some people are going to find that that's not enough. I don't want to say hand holding because that sounds dismissive, but I can't think of a similar, less offensive way to say that. But for some people, it's just right where they're like, oh, okay. Well, I can just follow along and they're going to tell me everything I need to know where I need to know it. And I can try to figure other things out. There is a mystery set forward here. So, there is a murder case. So I'm not saying you can't try to puzzle it out or get ahead of it, but just know that we'll tell you who the Kyros 3 are when you need to know. Like right now, they're just a mysterious thing we put out there. And when it's important to you, you don't have to go rush off to some Bible somewhere and find out what it is or dig through the prologue or the index or something. We'll let you know when you need to figure that out. I think it's a confident approach in that we're like, we have the answers and you'll get them in the order you need to receive them for this to be the best story possible. But that doesn't mean it gels for everyone.
Sure.
Some people like something a little different, and that's okay too.
It is interesting. That was one thing I was going to bring up was, one part of Essex's life, Phaedra Essex, the main character. Well, main character, I say main character, but it's kind of like a co-lead with like, what would you say, Theron the second of Pax? Is that how you?
Yeah, Theron too.
I mean, like Theron is a really big part of the book too, but Essex is the main character, and there are core mysteries in her life.
Yeah.
And the mystery card is one you play a lot in Black Cloak, particularly in issue number 4, where there are mysteries on mysteries on mysteries, some of which get answered pretty quickly, and other ones you're just, kind of teased about.
Yeah.
I mean, how much you let readers know and how much you tease them, I imagine, is a tough thing to balance. In your mind, like, is there like a right speed and approach, or is it all very feel-based?
I think it's pretty tricky. It was trickier on Black Cloak at the beginning because when we first started, we weren't sure how we were releasing it on Substack yet. And so we thought we might be doing it in 5 or 10 page chunks. And so if that's true, then you need sort of those individual chunks to be rewarding enough for a reader if they're coming in weekly to read it. But then it's all still got to hold together, for print for a single issue and then an eventual trade. So that's a lot of masters. And I think that's part of the reason the print issue 1 is so oversized, is because we were trying to break it up more. And so if we'd wanted a normal size number 1, issue 1 and 2 would have had very similar endings. So this isn't my first day at making comics, and I know that we shouldn't do that. And so we were like, well, let's just double these up. So we just get that one ending, and one is just like a beat within the story, and one is a cliffhanger. And then we can use it that way and go from there. So I think you just have to look at each problem as it arises, right? And sort of figure out what's the best. I mean, because comics is such a weird art in that form anyway, where you have to provide satisfying reads month to month individually, but then they're all coming together to perform a even greater read for the whole. But if they're not enjoyable and they don't have stakes and rising and falling action and cliffhangers in those individual pieces, it's very easy for someone to just be like, I'll just finish this later. It's not that important. I've got a lot that I'm buying. So you really have to bring it for each issue. So, I think I approach Black Cloak, even though it doesn't have action the same way that a Captain Marvel comic would, for example. I still need that rising action and certainly more hooks, more mysteries, and some kind of cliffhanger where we need to know more in order to make people come back, so we keep staying invested. But I mean, listen, comics are tough, man. The attrition rate on comics is just absolutely brutal. And so, I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, we definitely knocked it out of the park. We've got as many readers on issue 6 as we do on 1. Completely not true. It's not how it works. You're going to lose readers every month. Just try to lose as few as you can, I mean, unless you're like a crazy like Saga or Immortal Hulk or something where you go super viral and then your readership goes up, which is almost unheard of. But
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. May is lining up to be one of the biggest months ever for Zoop. It's going to feature campaign launches for the Stardust Anthology spearheaded by Van Jensen, Jason Copeland's Powerhouse Full Tilt, Shannon K. Garrity's Skin Horse, Luciano Vecchio's Sereno, and an art book by the one and only Jorge Molina. Not only that, but you still have time to support Mark Nelson's Thunder Hunters and rising superstar Marco Fontanilli. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, the creators appreciate your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show.
And the tricky thing, too, of course, is the fact that we're in an era where more people are like sampling than ever before, where you buy the first issue and then they come back for the trade because they're like, I like that. I'm just going to wait until trade.
I think that's very true. I do that too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, there's more comics than ever. It's just hard to decide. I mean, this is terrible, but it's just like, what is worth reading in single issues versus reading in trade? That's not terrible, I guess, but it's just like, it's the math of that and the trying to plan for that is really difficult for everyone. I do think it's interesting too, though. You mentioned earlier about how Gurihiru is trying to think simultaneously for what would his Jeff look like in the infinite comic structure versus like also as a single issue. It's interesting too. I hadn't really considered how Black Cloak would be affected by the Substack experience because you're trying to make it a satisfying chunk for readers on there while also trying to make it make sense as a narrative that would take place in a comic book issue form and trying to serve, like you said, those multiple masters at the same time. That's complicated.
Yeah, it is. We got really lucky because when I was like, well, why are we trying to figure this out ourselves? How much these readers want to read, how they'd like to ingest this. We've got them. Let's ask them. So we literally did a poll and I was like, do you guys want to read weekly in like smaller 5-page chunks, or would you rather read 20 to 25 pages once a month? And overwhelmingly, I think it was like 80% ish was for let's just read once a month. And I think that's probably a lot of things. People are used to that schedule. People don't want to even though they want to keep up with the newsletter, they don't want an email box just filled with emails that they can't keep track of and keep on top of. And so this has worked pretty well, but I was very grateful when that was what they voted for because I was struggling. We were struggling. I think I was taking the brunt of it because, Meredith has other brunts she has to deal with. So breaking the story into parts was mine. And it was really difficult. And I was not sure how well it was going to translate. And I also was very afraid that if we kept going down that path, the people who were not going to get served, I was going to have to not serve the Substack people as well as I wanted to, because that was just going to be too many breaks.
Right.
It was just going to read so choppy in singles and worse trade if I tried to keep serving that. That said, asterisk by that, because when I first was exploring the possibility of this, one of the things I did was look at a lot of comics I've written and see how they break. Like, where would some natural breaks come if you were trying to put this online, for example? And I found, because of the sort of rising and falling of the comic book and the formula you tend to use that's got, X amount of punching pages and, et cetera, it didn't break that unnaturally. You could break it pretty easily, which I sort of knew was going to happen because of how Ed Brisson and Matt Rosenberg and I wrote Uncanny X-Men together.
Mm-hmm.
Like those were pretty natural breaks too, which sort of none of us expected, but it worked out pretty well. So it was an interesting experiment for sure. But I am grateful that we ended up going the much easier route for everyone's. I think we end up with a better book as a result.
Yeah. I did want to ask about the Substack part of it because for listeners that don't know, Kelly, you got a Substack program which afforded you the ability to support some of your work in exchange for producing a certain amount. I think it was like 100 posts. Wait, is it 100 posts? Yeah, 100 posts.
Yeah.
And on Substack over the first year. And the interesting thing about that is the complicated part about some of this is it's not that these books would have never existed. Like, it's like you would have done Black Cloak and the Cull probably at some point. I guess my question is, do you think those books would exist as they do now without the deal? Or did it just speed them up, basically?
I don't know that they would have existed.
Really?
I want to believe that they would, but I've been trying to get a creator owned off the ground for years. I mean, you get into this industry and they're like, all the pros tell you, they're like, listen, your work for hire pays your rent. Your creator owned pays your retirement. You have to be making that stuff that's still going to be paying you money later. Whether it's because someone's optioning it or, the trades go on forever, maybe, or whatever, right? You have to be creating that work in that backlog. And I had been it was a priority to me. I knew it was important. And after the first couple years of being exclusive at Marvel, I was really trying to make something happen, but I never had enough money. I never had enough time to step back from it. And I want to believe I would have figured it out because my colleagues all around me were figuring it out, but I hadn't. And so I don't know if these books exist without Substack. I don't know what else would have come along that would have allowed me to be able to pay the professional rates that I needed to pay to get the people on the books that I got. And I also don't know what would have paid me to allow me to step back from doing 5 Marvel comics a month or whatever I was doing for so long. So I'm not sure, but they certainly wouldn't have existed in this form. Like, for example, almost every issue of both the Cull and Black Cloak, the Cull less so than Black Cloak because Mattia's painted art is very time consuming. So, you're not only adding money every time you add a page, but you're adding a week or whatever it is to the schedule if you can't stay at 20 pages. So the Cull is a little bit oversized, but it's pretty reasonable. But the Black Cloak is very oversized. That trade when it comes out, so it's 6 issues, but it's nearly 200 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And that never would have been possible without it because, I have to pay Meredith for every page we go over. I don't think I paid myself for those script pages I went over, but I paid myself in other ways. So, it's fine. But yeah, it gets expensive. It gets time consuming. And I had not figured it out how to do an image book. Honestly, it was really hard even now. You put a lot on yourself and you have to do a thing that I don't really like, which is you become a lot of jobs instead of a writer. You're a writer and sometimes an editor and a proofreader and a PR person and a post office delivery guy. You're just doing everything. And I find that hurts the writing. So it's not my favorite thing, but I also think it's part of the process if you want to do an image comic and have control of that content and own that property, so it's worth it, but it's hard. I don't know how people just do it without help. I really don't.
I will say, I think that while it's hard, you are uniquely adept at it. Part of me wonders whether or not it's, to some degree, you have the background of writing online that a lot of people don't necessarily have. And it just seems like a lot of times your community is a lot more engaged.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, it's just that's one of the tricky things is you can produce a great volume and you can have all these great things, but sometimes if you don't kind of pull the right levers, people are engaged. No one, the one who's best at it in my opinion is probably Brian K. Vaughan on Exploding Draft, because all he has to do is be like, what's your favorite type of sandwich? And all of a sudden there's 5,000 comments of people.
Honestly, it's a trick. It works.
It works so well.
I've stopped doing it in part because I was like, am I just ripping this off from Brian K. Vaughan? Vaughan. And then I'm like, wait, Brian K. Vaughan didn't invent asking questions. I'm probably allowed to ask questions, but it's true. If you just ask a question, it's people just are dying to be heard. People have thoughts about things and they want to tell people about it. And they maybe don't want to tell, the person that they live with who's irritated with them because they've all been trapped inside for 3 years, but they do want to tell someone who's asking about it online,
Yeah.
And that engagement is great. I don't think my community isn't huge, but I will say it's very high quality. I think the people who are on my Substack are so nice. They're so optimistic and encouraging and positive, and they're so supportive. So much so that, I've been really, even when I did my Kickstarters, I have a very high quality level. Like, I'm trying to deliver at a high level all the time. Like, I have high standards and I want those to be met. And I'm very disappointed when I don't make that. But so, I'm very good at putting out my deliverables and stuff for the most part. But I've very rarely experienced that thing that so many creators who do any kind of funding directly with their audience, I don't get angry emails from people going, where's this thing? And I've been late. I was super late on get these founders out. I hurt my knee. I hurt my back. I was sick. All these things happened this winter. I got 2 very polite emails going, oh, hey, I just wanted to check you hadn't sent the packages yet because I'm going to move. Those were the emails I got from these people. They're so encouraging and lovely. So I don't know. If that's something I did, then I'm grateful. And I hope I can duplicate it in the future because I feel very lucky to have them.
Yeah. It's great to hear that that has, the deal has allowed you to do that because it's interesting. I don't know. It's such an odd environment for comics right now, where it's even somebody like you, you're writing Captain Marvel, you've written Black Widow, you've written the X-Men, et cetera, and even for you, it's kind of a struggle to do that. That actually ties into. I did want to ask about Black Cloak's kind of general structure because I think one of the things that's interesting about Black Cloak is it very much feels like one core story and one that's going to be resolved within this arc, at least in the case sense. But it's such a big world that I could easily see it being kind of like a Gotham Central style book with a rotating cast of Black Cloaks, or one where it's just Essex and Theron dealing with a different case each arc.
Yeah.
What's the shape of this series going forward? Is that something you can talk about yet, or are you saving that for later?
Yeah, so Meredith and I, we came into it going, all right, we're doing these 6 and we're doing this story and we'll see. And I think that we sort of got the worst possible situation, which is I feel like we're right on the edge where it's maybe not financially viable it's right on the edge. I got a very nice email from Eric at Image that was very encouraging about the book and that was sort of encouraging us to go forward. And it was right at a key time that I really needed to hear it because Meredith and I both really wanted to do it. But I get nervous about committing to something because I want to be able to deliver it well. And I don't want to commit unless we can get there, So, but she and I talked it over and we think we're just successful enough. We're definitely going to keep going. So 6 has a very big end. So that will be in June, end of June. And then the trade will be in September, October, I think. September, maybe, I hope. And then the new issue, I'm not sure if that'll be a 1, if it'll be called something slightly different, maybe it'll have a subtitle or whatever. Or maybe we'll just keep going with 7. That will be probably November or December. So give those trade waiters a chance to find us, hopefully. And then everyone come back for a big, exciting, arc 2. The shape of what you find will be very different because of the explosive issue 6 ending.
I like to think that just to ensure the further cute animal Jeff type connection, that it'll be Black Cloak, Mr. Starlight's Revenge.
Not that far off. I am trying to get Meredith to do another thing that would be more like Jeff shorts.
Oh.
The takas.
Yeah.
That we do on the Substack. But it's hard to figure out what that is If I could draw it myself, it's easier because then I can just experiment with it and see what works and what doesn't and what people are interested and what they're willing to pay for or not. But asking Meredith to come along when she's already got a pretty full dance card, including doing more Black Cloak, it's a little trickier. But I'm trying to figure out a format. Meredith is such a good, fast journal comics person, too. I think it might actually be really cool for her if we can figure it out. Anyway, I was thinking about calling it Taco Tuesdays.
Oh, my God. Yes.
And running it on Tuesdays and maybe having a little Taka/taco icon. I don't know, something like that.
I'm all about it. See,
right?
what you really
Doesn't
need
that seem fun?
You need that and the trade to pop, and then you can kickstart a Mr. Starlight plushie, and the world will be lit on fire.
There you go.
Just a few more questions. I did want to ask, like, I came across an interesting line you had in an interview with the Comics Journal back in 2020 where you said about Hawkeye's eventual cancellation. You said, and I quote, "It was like many things, conceived as an ongoing, but always prepared for the axe." I thought that was an interest. I mean, I think it's something, it's just a realistic thing that you have to go into comics thinking these days, because it's just, no one is, I mean, this is a very dire way to put it, Kelly, but no one is safe. It's like, you never know if a book is going to pop or if it's not.
If your name's not Batman or Spider-Man, you're not safe. And even if you're the person writing those books, you might not be safe because you're not Batman or Spider-Man. But, so those books will go on forever, but the creative team won't. So, don't get too comfortable. I just think that's not a bad quote. I'm glad. I was terrified when I was like, oh, God, he's going to read a quote back to me. What do I believe it anymore? What is it? I totally stand behind that. And I think you're right. It is just a reality of the comics. I mean, I have never worked in comics in any kind of environment where you get more than, at best, you get promised 12 issues. At best.
Right.
And that's what I got promised on Hawkeye. And then they're like, no, it's going to be 10. And I was like, you guys, no. I was like, I can't. There's no way I can wrap it up in 10. You promised me 12. And then they were like, okay, we'll let you have 11. And I was like, are you kidding me? So they gave me 11. And then I don't know if it was that we had a little resurgence or just it was around that time that there was so much blowback about all the cancellations. I mean, I know Marvel really loved the book. They loved it. They didn't want to cancel it. They thought it was great. But they do what the numbers say, and that is a lot of blood, a lot of times. And they were like, all right, you're getting one more arc. And I was like, well, they're like, you can have your 12 back. And I'm like, great, that's too late. And they're like, well, you can do something else with it. And then you've got 4 more issues. And so we did, we were able to even get Leo to stay. It happened in enough time that we were able to get that last arc for us to stay together. And then Michael Walsh came in and did a really fun issue 12 with us. And so it all worked out. But yeah, I mean, we got more issues than we thought we were going to get, but only after all this trauma and pain of being canceled and trying to rework things to close it all out. And yeah, I mean, even when I pitched Captain Marvel, when it was like I was their premier female writer that they wanted on this book, and here's the movie's going to come out and do all this stuff. Like, I gave them stories for about a year that were like, here's what we could do. But there was no sense of, like, nobody was like, oh, we're definitely going beyond 5. Like, we didn't know. You don't know. It's just not the environment anymore. It's not the situation where you can build up B and C plots. And honestly, I hate to say it, but even though Captain Marvel had like a really successful long run, 50 issues is huge today. But it wasn't like with what happened with Immortal Hulk, where it was a critical darling and a huge hit. And so now the numbers are going up and they're like, okay, like, I don't know what issue it was where they told Al, listen, you're getting to 50, make your plans. But that happened relatively early for him. And that's great because I think he was able to really dig deep and do that. And I'm not saying I could have dug as deep as Al. Al's incredibly good at that. But we never had that on Captain Marvel. It was always like, okay, we get another one. And so then we'd gear up, sort of almost from scratch for another arc. It's hard to reinvent the world every 5 issues.
It almost seems like, this is probably the case with Black Cloak too, because you don't want Black Cloak, something that is yours and Meredith's, to end on a note where it just ends. It's like, it's unsatisfying. So it's almost like, it seems like you almost have to build in like narrative escape hatches for your projects.
You do. No, you totally do. Yeah, that's what that quote about Hawkeye means. I mean, it's like you want to build something longer and bigger, but you have to have an escape hatch so that you can, I can get out and tie this up. And we won't go to that other world, or we won't do this other thing, or we'll kill that character or whatever, so that you can get out of it, because you have to have that alternate plan ready to go.
Before we go, I want to bring up the Cull. It's your upcoming Image Comics miniseries with artist Mattia de Ulis.
I think that's pretty close.
Okay.
I did famously get to talk to him one time years ago when he and I were doing Jessica Jones together. Our editor, Alana, got us on the phone together, and I asked him how to pronounce his name. And we had that whole conversation, and it was like 7 years ago, and now I'm not sure.
Oh, no.
So super cool, right? No, it's Mattia de Ulis. It's Iulis. And the spelling confuses people a lot. I'm sure he spends his whole life dealing with this.
There's a lot of confusion online whether or not it's an I or a L, it seems, because there's a lot of people who are like, I'm going to make this an L. I'm like, I don't think that's what it is. But it's also letter Hassan Otsman El How. It is, as the solicit says, a sci-fi fantasy adventure following a group of high school friends who venture to a forbidden local rock to make a short film, only to find themselves in another world. And when they return home, everything has changed, and it's been years, not days. There is a preview for it in the back of Black Cloak number 5. It looks incredible. There's some very, very big monsters. The thing I want to ask about it is, like, we're still a ways out from that. It comes in August. But at the same time, it is a 5-issue miniseries from the jump. That's what it is. Is that partially a recognition of the market? Is that partially a recognition of how long it takes Mattia to draw this stuff? Because it's incredibly detailed work. Or is it just what the story needed?
Yes. It is the first two, and definitely not the third. I had to change the story to make it be able for us to do it in 5. And it's a risk, because it's a great ending. It's a great ending, but it's a real holy shit of an ending where you're like, I'm going to need season 2 right now, put it directly in my veins. And I can't help you there, because it does take a long time for Mattia to do that work. It's incredibly beautiful work. And there's worse news that could change, but he still has commitments to Marvel. So when he wraps the Cull, he has to go back. I think he would love to get back into the new miniseries, the Cull Volume 2 or whatever it is, right? He would love to do that. He's having a great time. We're having a great time. But that's not going to be possible. I'm trying to figure out I think it's early enough in that book that, because it's not out yet, we don't know what the FOC numbers are, things like that. There are possibilities like that. Maybe we can do it faster or sooner, or maybe there's a scenario where the nature of that book, we could do multiple artists. I would never want Mattia to feel pushed out by that. I would only want to do that if we're trying to get a story into people's hands faster, and we can find a way that we like to do that. But those are all conversations sort of still to be had for us. It's a little too early, with the book sort of not out there yet. We don't even have numbers yet, but maybe I'm wrong, but this one feels like it to me. I feel like people are sort of going to freak out over it. Some of that is just Mattia's work is spectacular. And because he draws the way he draws, like, it's so cinematic and it feels so real. And so this story, it's just cool, man. He just breathes really interesting life into stuff. And it's been really fun to do it with him. I think people are going to freak out, but I also think, listen, I'm, the whole first half of, like, I'm sure you noticed in that preview, like the first 3 pages are like big shockers, but then the 2 pages after that are really quiet with very little dialogue. Mm-hmm. And like the first half of the issue is mostly that, and then there's some stuff in the back half. So like, it's sort of a slow build, but it's a slow build. And you're also getting a giant double page spread of a monster. And you're like, wait, what does that mean? And how do these things connect? So I don't know. I think it's really special. I think it's really cool. I think we're talking about some interesting stuff sort of indirectly. and maybe directly too. But I don't know what the future for that one is going to be. There's a lot more story to be told, but we have some constraints on us. So, we're only going to do it the best way we can. But I don't know what the future holds on that one. It's a big question mark. I will tell people who are listening, if they're super excited about it, buy more and tell everyone, because, if we sell 100,000 copies of issue 1, we've got a lot more options at our disposal.
Yeah.
Than if we sell 20,000, 50,000 is, 100,000 copies is maybe Mattia gets to do whatever he wants now, I don't know. But so we're waiting to see what happens. I think, I told you that it was sort of everything except for it's what the story needs. I had to twist the story to make it work and to break it sort of into two parts, or, well, two initial parts. But I do think, one of the things you threw in there was it's just the market. I would have felt really comfortable doing more in this market with this project if it worked. But I think the market, even though I didn't consider the market in that way, the market is still making decisions for us because this is the reality of making comics.
Yeah.
Because Mattia has to sign contracts, I have to sign contracts, whatever, because we have to work for these other companies and like freelance together a bunch of different jobs to make a life, like it leaves a lot of question marks and a lot of things that can go wrong for that to not really work. And I think the market, the market decides who lives and who dies. I'm sorry to say, it just does.
And the tricky thing too is like for hire offers certainty while creator owned offers uncertainty, and like trying to balance those two things is really difficult. That actually leads into my last question. I did want to ask about your kind of your workload and your project mix. Your Captain Marvel run is actually ending with number 50 the week after this podcast hits. As far as I know, you don't have any other Marvel work announced. You have a story in Harley Quinn, Black, White, and Redder with Annie Wu, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Annie Wu, the incredible Annie Wu. You do have Black Cloak cooking. You have the Cull coming. So you're having a moment where you're a lot more creator-owned leaned. Apparently, that's what it seems like. Is that a situation where you're finding yourself leaning more in that direction, or is this more of a situation where you're sort of between a bevy of projects, so it's more about the way things appear than anything?
I think it's a little bit that, like the appearance, because I have something very big that has not been announced yet. I think it'll be announced in the next few weeks that I'm super excited about and that I've been working on for a long time. And I think people are going to flip out over it. It's very cool. I do have a few Jeff-shaped things. I'm doing some more Marvel Unlimited with Jeff, a season 3. And I pitched a little Jeff book project to them that's like a little side thing. And I've got a Jeff with Gurihiru Venomverse 5-page short. So there's some little things for Jeff over at Marvel, but you're right that I'm not doing any other. My exclusive with them lapsed last year, and I didn't sign a new one. And so, yeah, I'm a free agent, and yeah, that's a transition-y thing. But I would say the other thing that's a factor there is just, me sort of talking about how hard it was to like launch these books, leading up to launching these books. It took a lot out of me. Like I felt very tired, and I looked around and I'm like, wait, why don't I have any money? And it's because I'm writing so much less. And so it like, when you're pitching and you're in transition and you're between projects and everything. And I just didn't have the energy to like hustle up a bunch of new work for hire work. I was just tired, man.
Sure.
It was like, it took a lot out of me. It took a lot out of me creatively too. Like, when you're started feeling burned out, it's, as a creator, it's not just about literally being tired and worn out and needing a break. It's about, I can sit at the computer all day. If I don't have any ideas in my head, like it's a pointless effort for everyone, So there was some burnout factor for sure affecting that, but I'm getting closer to finishing another very big pitch that I'm super excited about. And I think the writing will be a little bit more on the wall when that announcement goes out. I think people will sort of get the gist. But creator owned and this new direction is going to be a lot of it for the next year or two. Yeah.
I'm excited to see whatever shape it takes, even though it won't all be Jeff shaped, which is very exciting. But Kelly, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about Black Cloak, the Cull. It's Jeff. and more. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much, David. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Kelly Thompson. You can find Thompson on social media at 79 semifinalists in her work in Black Cloak, Captain Marvel, and the upcoming The Cull at Image Comics. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman, who stepped in and edited this week's podcast, which is the reason why it sounds as good as it does. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following it on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Cancel Comics, Scott Place, Darcy Van Polgees, Kevin Bides, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Matteo Ciccati, Chris Doré, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Arb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van Deven, Brian, Summit Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Chalvis, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Nick Bennett, Birdcage Comics Cafe, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinckley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Walls Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Carl McMahon, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.